but we're going to go right on into the Germany panel, and that'll start with Lauren Gayard. A quick little recap on her bio. She's a transatlantic master's graduate, and she's currently serves as a director for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Bard College here in Berlin. And before assuming this position, Lauren served as the co-director and co-founder of the TechStart program at Code University of Applied Sciences. And that is where she supported people from historically marginalized communities, specifically those with a forced migrant background, to upskill in tech and find an entry-level position in the field of digital product development. And her presentation is entitled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion: From American Utopian Ideal to Emerging Profession in Europe.
Okay, so diversity, equity, and inclusion from American Utopian Ideal to Emerging Profession in Europe. I admit this title was a little ambitious. It's something I should do for a PhD. So instead, I will talk about this. There's been backlash. Should we be worried? I think it's a simpler way to go. And then I will more specifically discuss in what ways does this impact the DEI profession in Germany. And when I say we, I really mean anyone who's concerned with DEI and where DEI is present in your workforce. So in order to answer that, I'll go over what exactly is the backlash, what are the implications, and what's the impact. Again, focusing more on Germany, although I do go over what this means for the US and globally, and then talk about the future outlook of DEI in Germany and come to some conclusions. At the end, I'll discuss the profession of DEI for those of you who might be interested in DEI. So again, I'm Lauren. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Let's jump in. So what's the backlash? It's quite a busy slide. It takes a long time. If I really go through it, I'm going to be conscious of the time. So briefly speaking, to know the backlash, you have to understand the principles and the arguments for DEI. So on the left, you see a timeline. This is based on, oh no, you're still on the title. This is not good. How do I go back to that? Okay, what about now?
Yeah.
Better? Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, let me see. Can you still see the screen? It just Okay. Wait, which screen can you see? Oh no, this is not good. Okay, maybe I stop for just 1 second and then restart it. All right. Presenter, let's see. Okay, you might now, oh wait, there we go. There. Now you might see the tabs, but I'm fine with that if that's fine with you. Okay, now can you see it? Yes. Okay, good. Tech. Wow, none of us are really good at tech. Okay, so now we're on this slide. So I won't go through the entire slide specifically, but just kind of generally speaking, on the left, these are the dates. This is the history of DEI in a nutshell. So I'll focus on from the 1960s, 1970s. This is when DEI began, and this was during the civil rights movement. I call this theme race, and the principles of this were tolerance, acceptance, and equality. So the arguments for DEI, specifically for tolerance, was that if we introduce this in the workforce, it would mitigate rising disruption, and it would satisfy a moral arguments for human equality. So the basics were, let's just be equal. Can you just tolerate us in the workplace? It's pretty simple, right? Well, we'll see. Okay, so then moving to the 70s through the 90s, mid-90s, I think the conversation changes a little bit, and it's more about nationality and gender. So now you start to see conversation about multiculturalism and feminism. The arguments for having this introduced into the workforce was that it could prepare the nation for demographic change and revolution of minorities becoming the majority. So I don't know if you remember when we were, at least when I was a kid, for those of you who might be older, maybe you were older at the time, but we talked about in the US that we were a melting pot, right? So that's this multiculturalism. We're supposed to all just become American. And that rhetoric moved from multiculturalism to more of a cultural pluralism. So that was about, okay, we're also our other identities. So I can be African, I can also be American. So we started to see that actually in national surveys. So that became kind of a thing in the 70s, and it's stuck around to this day. It is changing. That's a conversation for another day. So this is when we start to see change happening in Germany as well. So in the late 70s, we see the Gleichstellungsbeauftragte. These are people who are supposed to be focusing on gender equality at the time, specifically women. So again, you're looking at this feminist wave. This is the second wave of feminism. This really focused on the privilege of white women at the time. And we see that also in Germany, especially when Audre Lorde comes to Germany. She's was an American Black lesbian mother, poet, writer, if you've ever read how she identifies herself. And she came to Germany in the late 80s and helped found the ISD, which is the Initiative Schwarze Menschen für Deutschland. And this was a group of people who identified themselves as Black Germans or Afro-Germans. And they also did a lot of work promoting Blackness, being duplicit in identity, and that also transmitted into the workforce as well. And then in the 90s to I would say 2020, I use this as, like, let's say a milestone or a timeline with George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. You see that the conversation has changed more to this individualization. So we're now looking at the ADA, the American, I think, Disability Act, right? And also the focus is on diversity, generally speaking. So this transferred into the workforce. You probably have heard or read this study by McKinsey, but it suggests that diversity makes better decisions for businesses. And when we focus on creating access for all, that's also better, and it profits businesses. This we also see happening in Germany. There's the AGG, which is basically the ADA, but for Germany, and that came into pass in '94. There's also the Diversity Charter, which was started by 4 major businesses in Germany. This was set up by Deutsche Telekom, Deutsche Bank, BP Europa, and Daimler. So we start to see that businesses care. I'm going to put that in air quotes. And then this gains traction. So now we have something. The Diversity Charter still exists today. And we have a lot of businesses that are signing up to this charter saying, we want your stamp, we want your certificate of approval on our website so that we can say we're diverse. Yes, we've done it. That's another conversation. So that's picked up since then. And that was in 2006. So this is quite late. And then you're looking at 2018, and that's when the third gender comes into play in Germany. So this is, if you do not identify on the binary scale of male and female, you now can click this, catch-all box of diverse. And then we look at 2020, and I would say October 7th and today. And this is what I call accountability. This is this phase. The principles here are equity and inclusion. So now we're really focusing on those things, as well as justice, sense of belonging. And I heard this the other day in a talk, and someone said, this is about how businesses need to go clean up your kitchen. It's not just about what you're saying on the outside, but you need to align with internally your leaders and going from a top-down approach. What are you actually doing? And then you can go and make your brand, a very diverse and inclusive brand. All right, that was the quickest overview I could possibly give. Happy to talk more later. So what's the backlash? This is what I'm reading everywhere. I could have posted pictures of news articles, quotes, and headlines, but we've all seen those. So these are just a few I've collected. I'm going to talk about the ones boldened. So this is what I've heard. DEI efforts cannot be accurately measured, and DEI strategies are ineffective. Another one, DEI initiatives promote reverse discrimination, and that violates the law. Universities aren't doing enough to prevent acts of anti-Semitism and racial violence. I think we've seen that in the US mostly, also at Harvard, MIT, and UPenn. DEI is restrictive. Freedom of speech and academic freedom are in jeopardy. I've heard that both in the US and also here in Germany. So let's look at the backlash that is mostly US-centric. This chart and image basically just shows us that diversity programs are being cut. In 2020, I believe, is when the first one, on the left side, in businesses, the mention of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, in quarterly earning calls, it shot up after the murder of George Floyd. There were many more job availabilities for chief diversity officers right after that, and now it's just declined rapidly. In universities, as people from Chapel Hill will also know, there are certain states that have proposed legislation that limit DEI programs and offices on college campuses. And in light pink, those are the ones that have been proposed, the anti-DEI bills, and in dark pink, so to speak, it's the ones that have been passed. So laws have been changing politically, and that means colleges and businesses are also changing what they're able to offer. So this is very US focused. It's great for reflection for Europe, but I believe that it's mostly relevant for companies and institutions that are in Europe dealing with the US market. So to recap, backlash isn't new. Backlash has occurred ever since the beginning of DEI in the civil rights movement. It's not just Justice Clarence Thomas who helped overturn affirmative action. There was also Bayard Rustin, who worked alongside MLK-J. He was also not a proponent of affirmative action, fun fact. And since the civil rights movement in the US and the second wave of feminism in Germany, there has been DEI. So think back to that equal employment opportunity law that was also in 1965 in the United States, and also the Gleichstellungsbeauftragte Personen that we now have in Germany. So why now? Why is it happening? I think we can see some patterns. What I see is injustices that accumulate to a point of a major event or war or media coverage, and then that leads to social uprising, and that leads to legal change. And then we have institutional response. So what are the implications of this? In Europe and in Germany, I see that there are two things we have to discuss. One, Europe does look to the US, but not necessarily to copy the US. So DEI is localized due to different legal realities, political realities, and societal conversations. Also, the second thing, Europe and Germany, we are the West, but we are a different continent, nation state in the EU, and a governing entity. So that means that our narratives on DEI are also different. So some examples of that. Here are a few highlights that I at least come into contact with and have recently. The discussion on parental leave. The laws are also changing in Germany on this, with how much money you can get when you're on parental leave. And inequality, there's basically in Germany and in other parts of Europe, if you are on parental leave, you are guaranteed your job back. And this, for a lot of women, is not the case. They get their job back, let's say, but then because of qualifications that are not up to date or skill sets that they've now missed out on having the opportunity to train, they are then let go from their jobs. So there's backlash there when it comes to, well, what is DEI really doing, right? Gender inclusive language. So this recently, I don't know if you followed German news, but this happened in Bavaria last week. I see some nods in Berlin here. Basically, there's now less gender inclusive language. They're not teaching this in schools. Since 2018, when the third gender category came about, I think it was in Hanover, and they actually, I believe in 2019 or so, said legally, we will teach gender inclusive language. And so it's interesting that this is also creating some sort of backlash, politically speaking, too, depending on where you're located in Germany. Next is academic censorship. So I'm seeing that mostly here in Berlin. This has come about really since October 7th, and this has to do with immigration. It has to do with the war. There's some rhetoric, especially at FU, that perhaps if you speak on anti-Semitism, you could be exmatriculated. And this is from a former German law that was then, I guess, retracted, but now it's back up for debate. So that's a very hot topic at the moment. And then lastly, race as an identity indicator when it comes to surveys. This has always been the case in Germany, I think, since the late 80s. Should we have this? Should we not have this as something we can talk about? So let's see. And the impact in Europe and Germany. Here are a few highlights. Last year, there were some massive layoffs, and I was part of that, actually, also working in DEI. So I believe fully that this was financially motivated. This did not have anything to do with the current backlash that's going on that we see in the United States, but nevertheless, it's still carrying over today. What I am seeing now is a lot of rehiring in many companies that did let DEI professionals go. That's globally speaking. And I've also seen that DEI has been added under job descriptions, different roles, and in different departments across companies and also in universities. And since October 7th, speaking with and also doing some freelance work myself, I see freelancers, they have gotten so many opportunities to have jobs at the moment because companies and universities do not know what to do. So there's an increase in university job advertisements as well, down in Munich for a head of DEI, as well as at ESMT here in Berlin. So interesting stuff. So the current outlook, let's see. So I've spoken with some people from those companies and universities listed below. And here are just two things to summarize. One who says, we're not to worry. I want to tell you that this person is European African as well. We have different narratives. Germany feels stuck in the education and awareness phase. I, at least, don't see this phase going away. What we need to do is move more into the action phase in companies. Some companies need to clean their kitchen. So that was the DEI brand manager. And then someone who is worried, this is an American colleague and friend, and she studied education policy in the United States and has been living here and working here for the past 4 years. And she says education policy has become polarized as in an extremist way in the United States. I do fear that this might happen in Germany in the next 5 to 10 years. So there's a lot of work to do. In summary, what could be slightly worrisome is there is political polarization. We do see that here in Germany. There are right-wing sentiments, there's also left-wing sentiments, and in some odd cases, they're full circle coming together and saying the same thing. That's worrying. The next thing, it's all about the brand. Sometimes you do feel like that companies and universities are just doing it for the checkbox, or, for example, I am a token. Who knows? And then we also need to talk about what's happening in academia. Is academic freedom and free speech under threat? These are hot topics. These are slightly worrisome when it comes to DEI. Looking a little bit deeper into what DEI deals with, and basically what all organizations, institutions, universities have to abide by are all of these laws. So in my position and in any position in a university for all employers, this is what we have to keep in mind. UN law, EU law, the European Accessibility Act, German law, and this goes for all employers, the Grundgesetz, of course, but Article 3 in particular, the Gleichbehandlungsgesetz, the AGG, also the Federal Equal Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities Act. This is federal and state mandated, and then specifically about physical accessibility, digital accessibility, and by June 28 next year, we have to implement basically very harsh or needed, I would say harsh, but based off of what we currently have for Germany, requirements that we have to implement in all businesses, universities, companies, etc. Also for German law, universities have to abide by state law. So this is the Hochschulgesetz, and every state has their own Hochschulgesetz. In the Berliner Hochschulgesetz for 59A, that actually states that my position is legally mandated. So universities have to have either a representative in DEI or a committee, or both. And then the Hochschulgesetz 59B, 5B and C, those then outline the requirements. Happy to go over all of those. It is quite extensive. Okay, so a deeper look into the EU and Germany. Culturally and economically, citizenship laws. Germany now has said that they can have dual citizens. So this is definitely going to increase diversity. There's also a shortage of skilled workers. That's not new. The German industry and economy is kind of sinking a little bit. So there is a need for change and to enhance the German economy. Does that mean we're going to get new industries? We're definitely seeing an increase in tech, also in English, English-speaking language. So I really believe that there's going to be a lot more people here, and Germany needs to figure out how to include them. So in conclusion, do we need to be worried? And will the current backlash have an impact on the future of DEI in Germany? We can say the following. It takes time for laws to pass. We're all the way up at the EU level, the UN level, EU level, German as well. Germany likes to follow laws. Okay. And German culture will shift. And there's going to be an increased needs for resources, again, more jobs for skilled workers and new industries. And that will lead us to a lot of globalization. Of course, that increases diversity. And like I said, the need for inclusion. Okay, so concluding statement, it's not likely that we need to be worried that DEI will go extinct. It may, however, take a new shape or form. This is still a profession that's emerging with iterations, I would say, at least in Germany and in universities in particular. Someone the other day called me a pioneer in German universities, so that was cool. I'll take it. So what could happen? In companies, it might remain the same across the globe, especially in Western countries. So terms have already changed, actually. If you look at companies and you're looking for jobs, you might see people in culture teams rather than HR. And that to me already indicates that DEI is really taking a very formal position in companies. And I think it's there to stay, regardless if you see DEI director or so. It's still there. In universities, I think, especially in the US, it will have to change. People need to reassess, what does DEI look like in universities in the United States? I'm currently doing that, but in Germany, but that's because we're so behind, I believe. So I think I'm looking at it as an opportunity. What can we do? Here you go. So your DEI team has been cut. What can you do? Hire them as freelancers. Give them the work. You also need it. So invite them for trainings, invite them for talks, workshops, for everyone at every level in your organization. You can learn a lot. Learn from them now before they go. So set yourselves up for success by taking action now. Appoint people across your organization to be the DEI leaders, right? So you need to also do the work anyway. I do tell people, I wish my job didn't exist. It shouldn't have to exist. That's the truth. The last thing, get creative. So this is where I'd say, hey, US, maybe look towards Europe. Look towards Europe for a universal approach to addressing equity and inequality. So for example, when making admissions decisions, align on your values. For example, look for perseverance in an application. So when you have someone writing an essay, you say, our value is we're looking for someone who can overcome something, who can be a high achiever. Well, what does that look like? Let them tell you a story where they've persevered, they've overcome something. I almost guarantee you they will share something about their identity. So these are kind of workarounds that you can still stick with. Okay, we still want to make sure that we're getting some marginalized background individuals. All right. I have no time left, but basically the profession, that's what I do. It's quite extensive. I thought it'd be a good little snippet for you. A lot of DEI professionals deal with compliance and policy. We have to look at law. Student support for me, I work at a university, campus and outreach. I work with external partners and companies, staff and faculty support. I have to give trainings, hiring practices for professionals, and then do a lot of communication. So internal communication as well as external communication. If you're convinced you want to do DEI, here are some skills. If you want to work in startups, SMEs, or corporations, regardless of where in the world, you do need to have a general knowledge of this business structure and how each department functions. It will be so beneficial. Academia, for those who are academics, you will understand, you need to understand academic structures and the politics of academia. If you work with people who have PhDs, but you yourself do not have a PhD, you will need to figure that out. Okay, get some strategies. All right, so knowledge. It's really good if you have knowledge in law. You can learn this as well. I get to that in a second. Read. Sociology, you work with people. Psychology, you need to understand how people work. Global politics, you need to keep on top of the news, especially if you work in international environments. And philosophy, why do you stand for what you stand for? I promise you in academia in particular, people will ask you this question in a roundabout way. So when it comes to utilitarianism, the justice system, what is justice? What does that mean? What does that look like? Who should get what resources? These are really hot topics. So human rights at the end of the day, this is pretty much what this is. It's also civil rights. So if you, just for some tips, if you want to work, stay curious, network. A coffee is never just a coffee. Read, share what you're doing and connect with others. That was a lot. Thank you for listening. Happy to talk more.